without stopping bench pressing, what is the best way to reverse very high internal rotation I have? I'm assuming he's talking about in his shoulders.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, any shoulder thing is going to start from the inside out for me. Like we're gonna take a look at
Yeah.
rib cage shape, T spine position, movement into the scabs. Um, so I think a lot of it is like, well, what are you not doing? Okay, we know what you're doing, and you're not going to stop doing it. How can we shore up your defenses by giving you some variability? Because the thing with that it ultimately loads down to or boils down to, and I think this term has taken a bit of flack lately, and I don't think it's justified, is it really comes down to quote unquote load management. But I understand how load management can be seen as a bit of a smoke bomb, but hear me out. Bench press is this heavy, especially for Craig, heavy bilateral upper body movement that trains, a certain group of muscles disproportionately than others, right? Like you're going to get your pecs, your delts, your triceps, and depending on how you do it, your lats are obviously going to be, and your upper back and all that. But a bench press is those things, but a bench press is not serratus, it's not oblique, it's not anything frontal plane, it's not anything transverse plane. So it's like, okay, you have an issue with rotation, transverse plane. You are going through an exercise that is predominantly sagittal plane, as much as anything can be predominantly anything without the inclusion of frontal or transverse. So if you don't want to just completely turn your back on the bench press, what you're going to end up doing is like, well, let's just give you some exposure to exercises in the frontal plane, exercises in the transverse plane, predominantly through the T spine and rib cage, but that bleeds out into your lower body sessions as well. And just by proxy of that, you're going to manage load, right? You're going to, if I introduce new and not novel, like specifically variable positions for you that you're not used to being in, you're not going to be strong in those positions because you're not used to being in them. Now, they're going to carry with it in the learning curve of these new movements in these planes you're not used to. Part of the learning is going to be learning how to adopt the shapes required to perform these movements at all. And that's where you start to introduce some variability. That's where you start to introduce some demands on the rib cage, on the scap, and then on the glenohumeral joint as an extension of that. That's where you start to see your range of motion start to open up because you're the time you're doing these drills or these exercises that are more plane specific to frontal and transverse planes, that ones you're not used to working in, you're going to be underloaded just because you're not used to working in them. And then secondly, as you get stronger in these specifically variable movements, more frontal plane and more transverse plane, part of strength and a big part of strength is efficiency, right? It's about being in the right positions. So if your exercise focus or your secondary focus becomes these positions that are required of you to get into these frontal and transverse plane exercises, you're going to be giving yourself a graded exposure to positions that will ultimately help facilitate more external rotation, a more neutral, a more variable shoulder position, rather than just this, bench mass monster internal rotated shoulder position. So yeah, you're going to get that if you become the shape of the thing you do all the time. If you just bench, you're going to become the shape of bench. And that can be good to a point until it's all of a sudden really not. But how you stave off that point from coming is like, okay, we're going to disproportionately bench, but with our accessories, we're going to spend almost like an 80-20 rule of like, okay, now I'm going to do 20% of my stuff is going to be on picking up on these movement qualities that bench just cannot offer me. And in the process of getting better and getting stronger at these movements, I'm going to be slowly introducing um, more exposure to these positions, which will ultimately offset my my very rigid way of presenting through the upper body. Because I think one of the things that powerlifters specifically go wrong with is they just have these really canned answers, and they go, "Oh, bench press, you just got to do a lot of upper back rows."
Yeah.
You're like,
Face
"Oh,
pulls.
that'll leave you in the exact same position you're in right now because it's the same thing. It's still sagittally plane front to back. You're just kind of like smushing the rib cage anterior to posterior, or posterior to anterior. So it's like that is how I kind of break it down. Is go, okay, at a high level, yeah, it is load management, right? But it's load management through exercise selection. It's load
Yeah.
management through learning. It's not just like, well, do some banded internal rotation and then just bench light and do like a dynamic effort bench day 2 by 10 at 20%. It's like, sorry, man, like it's 2025. Like you can't bring that shit here anymore. It's just not okay to say those things with a straight face. So, I just think that like, all right, it really comes down to what do you not have and how do we give that to you?
Yeah. Beautiful.
So that's
I
my thing.
think, yeah, no, I think that's a really good answer. And like just my interpretation of it in the scenario, and like something I'd add to that is that there's very few athletes that are actually going to have an increase in XYZ range of motion from what they're doing, right? Like baseball pitchers is a good example of someone that would. Like you start pitching at a very early age, like you're going to have torsion of that humerus that actually is expressed as a greater arc of external rotation. I don't think that's the case with most powerlifters in bench press. Like it's not like you're gaining more internal rotation. It's that glenohumeral joint is set at a trajectory that biases internal rotation. Like if this is the alignment on your car and this is you neutral, like you're tilted towards internal rotation. And that's not a shoulder issue per se. It's not a ball and socket issue. It's a scapulothoracic issue, which is like just a different way of saying exactly what you're saying. Is that the towards midline, like maybe from the trajectory that your spine sets on your thoracic spine, and then your thoracic spine allows your scapula to be in, the trajectory is skewed so that you're in this position that allows you to only express that arc as internal rotation. So addressing it isn't necessarily going to be something that's done at the ball and socket joint of the shoulder. And that's not an absolute statement. Like I'm sure plenty of times it is. Like that is the issue. But the majority of the time, it comes from setting a better trajectory through the thoracic spine, through the rib cage, and at the scapula so that you can express a full arc from external to internal rotation. And those are the things. That's like when you said the 80-20, like those are the 20% of things that are going to make a huge difference. And the thing is, like, once you've gotten into a place where this is now limiting your performance or causing pain or it's worth intervention, these are really non-fatiguing things that you can do alongside the things that you still want to do that are, probably the issue is that you're just doing those things uh, that are going to make a huge difference. And it's literally just having a better warm up and having thoughtful, meaningful accessory work. Like it comes down to coordinating the scapulothoracic joint so you can have a better arc of scapular rotation or better control over the scapula so that you can hit that whole arc of rotation at the glenohumeral joint. Sick. Let's do something to get you to push that rib cage into your scapula in your warm ups. Like do a fucking protraction plank. Do something that's going to get you to understand how to control that rib cage a bit better. Do something that's going to get you to rotate the scapula on your rib cage, getting towards the overhead position. Do like a 90-90 kettlebell carry or like an eccentrically loaded lat pullover. Like things like this can make a big difference. And if it's a position that you're not very competent in, it takes almost no stimulus to get you to start to adapt to that. So that's where my mind goes with questions like this. It's like understanding that it's not necessarily an issue of internal rotation. It's an issue that that's the only trajectory that your shoulder complex has allotted you to move through because you have zero competency to maintain the other side of that arc. So let's start with controlling the rib cage better. Let's start with understanding how to move the scapula on the rib cage. And then isn't it funny how the rotational issues at the shoulder start to go away once we get that far into the process? So it's like, if that's the issue you're having, it's because of everything you've been doing to date. And you only need to make small changes to set a different trajectory to get yourself out of that issue.